Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. I want you to imagine the entire national economy as a massive, incredibly complex engine. It's the kind of engine where every single gear, from the cash you and I spend at the local grocery store, all the way to the vast human workforce actually stocking those shelves, needs to be perfectly synchronized. When this engine is humming along, societies thrive. But when it sputters, that's when people start losing their jobs. So today, we're going to pop the hood and decode exactly how this machine works. To make sense of it all, we've got a clear roadmap. We'll start with the Keynesian economic engine, move on to spending, saving, and multiplying, and then track the highs and lows in booms, busts, and gaps. After that, we'll zoom way in for a look inside the labor market, and finally wrap things up with wages, interventions, and unemployment. All right, let's get started with Section 1, the Keynesian economic engine. We absolutely have to start with a brilliant foundational idea from the legendary economist John Maynard Keynes. He basically said that if you want to fight off a depression and keep people employed, you have to look at the economy's primary fuel, aggregate demand. Now, the ingredients of this fuel are pretty straightforward. You've got C for everyday private consumption, stuff we all buy, then I for investment spending by businesses. G is government spending on things like roads and schools, and finally the international piece. X for exports minus M for imports. You add all of that up and boom, you get your gross domestic product, or GDP. So, you see, aggregate demand isn't just some vague theoretical concept you only read about in textbooks. It is the literal mathematical sum of all purchases made across an entire nation at a given price level. It's the combined spending power of households, businesses, the government, and foreign buyers. That is what physically turns the gears of national production. Moving right along to Section 2, spending, saving, and multiplying. Now that we know what fuels the engine, how do everyday consumers like us control the throttle? Well, our spending basically falls into two distinct categories. First, you have your autonomous consumption. Think of this as your absolute baseline survival mode. You're going to buy groceries and keep the lights on, even if you lose your job and your income drops to zero, right? You just dip into your savings. The second part is induced consumption. This is the fun part. It's the spending that naturally grows as your disposable income rises. Simply put, higher income, higher consumption. But here's the strict mathematical reality of your wallet. Every single new dollar you earn faces a totally binary choice. You either spend it, which economists call the marginal propensity to consume, or MPC, or you save it, which is your marginal propensity to save, or MPS. Because a dollar can literally only be spent or saved, those two fractions will always add up perfectly to 1. So if you are the kind of person who spends 80 cents of every new dollar, your MPC is 0.8, which inherently means your MPS is 0.2. It's a perfect balance. Okay, up next is Section 3, booms, busts, and gaps. Just like any real-world machine, the economic engine doesn't just hum along at a perfectly constant speed forever. It revs up, it bogs down, and it follows the natural, undeniable roller coaster of the business cycle. Over time, an economy will climb up to a boom or peak. That's great for employment, but it often brings a lot of inflationary heat. Then, inevitably, it contracts into a recession, sliding all the way down to a trough or slump before finally, thankfully, clawing its way back up during the recovery phase. Let's actually zoom in on the problem we run into at that peak. When aggregate demand shoots right past the economy's full potential to produce, we hit what's called an inflationary gap. Basically, the engine is running dangerously hot. Every single person is out there spending money, but businesses literally cannot produce goods fast enough to keep up. And what happens? Prices just skyrocket. Conversely, think about what happens during that slump. When total demand just stalls out and falls way short of our full employment potential, we hit a deflationary or recessionary gap. In this scenario, the economy is nowhere near its potential. Factories are quiet, resources are sitting idle, and the real-world tragic result is high unemployment and sluggish national output. Which leads us perfectly into Section 4, inside the labor market. To truly grasp the tragedy of unemployment, we have to pivot away from these big macro theories and look at the actual human operators inside the machine. The labor market is simply where employers and the workforce meet to hash out wages and jobs. But the absolutely vital thing you need to remember here is that the demand for your labor is a derived demand. Look, a construction company doesn't hire carpenters just because they like having carpenters around. They hire them because everyday consumers are out there demanding new houses. It perfectly connects your specific job right back to that massive aggregate demand we talked about earlier. But hey, we aren't just unfeeling gears in a machine. We have lives. We have preferences. Which brings us to a wildly fascinating quirk of human behavior. Why would a massive, life-changing pay raise actually make you want to work fewer hours? The answer lies in something economists call the backward bending supply curve. It sounds crazy, but it makes total sense. Initially, when you get a raise, you experience the substitution effect. You eagerly trade your free time for more work because, well, the money is just too good to pass up. But eventually, once your hourly rate hits a high enough threshold, the income effect completely takes over. You're making so much money that your free time actually becomes more valuable to you than an extra $100. You start choosing 3-day weekends over a slightly fatter paycheck, causing your personal labor supply to literally bend backwards in decline. All right, final stop. Section 5, Wages, Interventions, and Unemployment. So what happens at the totally opposite end of the spectrum? What if the natural forces of supply and demand are leaving workers with a wage they can't even survive on? Well, that's when the government steps in as the mechanic. If the natural market wage is just too low, they institute a minimum wage. It acts as a strict legal price floor, meaning employers absolutely cannot pay less than that designated amount, no matter what. Now, setting a minimum wage is obviously designed to be fair and ensure basic human welfare. For instance, Fiji recently bumped theirs to $4.50 in 2023. But it does come with a very real economic trade-off. Because the wage is artificially forced higher, employers naturally want to hire fewer people, while simultaneously, way more workers are suddenly eager to supply their labor for that better pay. That mismatch mathematically creates involuntary unemployment, a whole group of people who are desperate to work at that new wage but just can't find a job because the demand isn't there anymore. And government intervention isn't just about tinkering with the minimum wage. To fix those massive macro-level deflationary and inflationary gaps we looked at earlier, governments pull the heavy levers of fiscal policy. If we're stuck in a slump, they use expansionary policy, slashing taxes or ramping up government spending to flood households with disposable income. But if the engine is overheating, they use contractionary policy, doing the exact opposite to choke off that excess demand and cool things down. So, as you digest all these incredibly complex moving parts today, from the multiplier effect on your everyday spending, right down to the harsh trade-offs of a minimum wage, it leaves us pondering the ultimate economic debate. Should the government act as a heavy-handed mechanic, constantly diving in with fiscal policies and price floors to perfectly tune the economy? Or should we step back and trust the engine's natural forces to eventually fix themselves over time? It's the central question of modern economics, and I want you to keep thinking critically about it as you watch the engine running all around you.